Okay, everyone, welcome to the Mind Body Energy Project. I am Yolanda.
I'm Tiffany, and we're live and recording now. Oh, that happened so fast.
Yay! I know. It's so
This
funny.
morning happened so fast.
Oh, honey, I'm still like trying to check into today. So, good
Yeah,
morning.
same. I'm going to be here with various liquids I'm trying to get into my physical body.
Yeah, I've only had half of my coffee so far, but hoping that it will kick in soon. So,
hmm
I just want to say to everyone listening, first of all, last week we did our spirit guide conversation. And thank you so much for everyone who responded and shared with us. A lot of response that people enjoyed that podcast, and it is a fun topic. It's a fun discussion. So we're doing the follow up today, which is different than our normal time. We usually do Wednesday nights, but I personally had some stuff come up yesterday, so that's why we're here this morning. And then next week, we will be talking about Oracle and Tarot cards and how they can be used for personal self discovery. So stay
hmm
tuned for that. So before we get into our discussion this morning, Love Bug, how was your week?
Um, Kind of all over the map. I feel
Mhm.
like this is my constant answer lately.
Happy end of the
Now
year.
that I just said it out loud, I was like, oh, wow, is that my life? My life is just all over the map.
Yeah.
That's okay. Um, yeah, it was a good week. Very eventful. A lot of different things going on. Um, Chatted with my spirit guides a little bit. Got some insight. It was good.
Yeah, I did unintentionally. I mean, honestly, this past week was a blur. I honestly don't even know what I mean, because it's end of the year. And so there's a lot of updates and preparation I have to do for the new year, like for my newsletter, updating my gift that people receive when they sign up for my newsletter, like updating the moon cycles, just so many things that I felt like I don't know, I was just so on the computer this week. But then yesterday,
hmm
interestingly, good morning, Bryn. Interestingly, yesterday while I was working on some things, and uh, it was like messages or, were just coming through and interrupting what I was doing. I mean, to the point where I had to literally like take a step back and time out and just be like, whoa, like I need to ground what's going on.
Yeah,
So, what were you going to
that's
say?
good awareness. I haven't quite gotten there yet. But taking the step back to notice it.
Yeah. Bryn said,
But I
love
mean,
this episode. Literally everything resonated with me and my experience. Good.
awesome.
Thanks for that, Bryn.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, babe. It was an accident. What were you
it's
saying?
okay. No, it's okay. I kind of don't remember because I'm so tired. I kind of remember. Bear with us this morning.
Yeah. We know
And
that all of you have
I've
different
had,
time zones, but it's 8 in the morning for us. And so,
yeah.
we're still
But
kind of,
normally that's not so bad, but it's been a weird
I'm
week.
telling you, this time
So,
change is still kicking my butt. What were you going to
hmm
say?
so I think what it kind of was a good segue to what I was saying about my week and
Uh-huh.
why it was weird is that if you're not mindful and paying attention to kind of what's happening time periods like the end of the year and all the things that come with it, then you get caught up in it and ungrounded. We will subconsciously take mental note and make a to-do list and get all of that stuff in our space, know how we have to move forward in the time and with our lives. But if we're not mindful of it, like getting it out of our actual physical system onto a piece of paper or putting it into action, like all that stuff just resonates within us somewhere and can kind of drive us crazy.
Yeah, well, it's really good that you say that, because just one thing, like side note of what you're reminding me of, is that we do go through seasonal shifts, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people around this time. I mean, there's kind of like this tug of war that goes on with us, because with our alignment with nature, there's like this part of us that just wants to go in, like settle
Yeah.
down, start to hibernate, so to speak. But then we also have the pressures of there's so much to do because it's the end of the year and we got things to wrap up in preparation for the new year and, holidays and all of this stuff. So there is this push pull, which I think puts a lot of us in like this foggy tailspin. But going
Yeah.
back to the spirit guides, this also ties
Right.
in with
That's what we're
how
here
I,
for.
yeah, how I felt yesterday. Because I was so in the zone of working on stuff in the computer, I really wasn't grounded. And so when these messages and things started coming in, and like I could feel the energies of all different things, I had to, like I said, walk away and really ground myself and become more present. And I think that's one of the things that's so important to highlight. I'm sure we touched on it last week, but I've been thinking about it all week. It is very important to be grounded into ourselves, especially if we're going to start exploring and strengthening our intuitive minds or working with guides and, all of these different things, because the extremes of anything is not good. And so a lot
Hmm.
of people will start to access the intuitive mind, whether intentionally or not. And if they're not grounded, they can really get lost in that space and seem kind of like out there, right? Versus, if you ground and understand that component first, it helps you to maintain some clarity and more like self control when you are moving into these higher states of consciousness, which feel different in frequency and energy. But also, again, you could feel loopy as hell if you are not
Yeah.
grounded into your person. So,
Hmm.
Bryn, I'm sorry, Bryn, still coffee, sorry. Bryn said, especially this time of year, too. Heck yeah.
Yeah. And you raise a really good point with that because like I've said in the past, I've always been very intuitive. So it's always kind of been this natural state. But once I started actually intentfully strengthening my intuition and um, paying mind to putting my efforts into doing that, um, I've started to notice like it does get stronger, but then there's, things that come with your own personal life. For me, it's anxiety. And so those two things, there'll be times where I get such strong messages that I can't tell if it's actual intuition or if it's anxiety. And that's if I'm not grounded. And I have been in that space quite often. But bringing it back to spirit guides, I have found when I do sit down and ground and open myself up to hearing messages, it helps to streamline an understanding of what the intuition is versus the monkey mind, essentially.
Yeah. No, entirely. And, it makes me think of two things. One, with the chakras, I know when I first got into this work, like I wasn't, prior to doing all of this, chakras wasn't on my radar. And so when I first started learning about the chakras, and everyone was so excited about the upper chakras and like the third eye and the crown, and, again, accessing these higher levels of consciousness. But again, there is a system to them, and we start at the foundation and build up. So even if you use the chakras as a roadmap, I mean, think of how important it is to start at the root, at the foundation, that grounding, that connection to body, and then like
Mm-hmm.
working your way up into accessing those higher levels of awareness. So it is,
Yeah.
again, like if this is something that you are already playing with or something that you're interested in, um, aside from like just contacting your guides, but just intuitive work in general, it is very important to work on your grounding and your self connection and your self management. And especially if you're someone who just naturally is clicked into all of this and you do feel kind of like it's not something that you control or know how to manage, it doesn't have to be that way. Again,
Mm-hmm.
go back to the base, go back to the
Yeah.
foundation and start focusing on your self connection. And then that helps you to even navigate your intuitive mind with more clarity. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing you said too, I don't know why, it reminded me of this, something we could talk about specific to spirit guides, is you don't have to talk to or communicate with everything that shows up in your space. So this is like another pitfall or like a caution for everyone. Sometimes when we start consciously paying attention to what we recognize intuitively, it can be exciting. And so some people will fall into just the excitement of making like contact or recognizing something. So they will like blindly trust. And there really is, it's kind of like with human beings, right? There are certain people that you meet that you don't necessarily want to associate with. And there may be certain people that you meet and you're like, I don't know if that's my cup of tea. The same thing for these different energies and guides and all of these things. So everything that you perceive in non-physical form isn't necessarily a guide and isn't necessarily someone that you want to communicate with. And you have choice. You can tell things to leave your space. You can ask questions. You can, whatever, but don't just go blindly. Bryn says, yes, well, we can try to balance the upper chakras as much as we want, but if our root chakra is in balance, we're not grounded to earth. We'll be thrown off balance all over again. Grounding is a must. True story.
Yeah. And I was going to bring it back to that when you were talking about the chakras, that you can't build a house without foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And our physical bodies are what that foundation is in order to be the vessel for housing the upper consciousnesses that we are capable of, or that we're trying to reach. And it makes me think of, well, the chakras always make me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know it, it's the pyramid of psychological development, and the very bottom rung, the bigger base of the pyramid, is physiological needs, which are food, shelter, water. You can't have self-actualization if the body isn't well maintained, if your brain isn't thinking right because it doesn't have the correct nutrients, or you're not hydrated, then there's no way you could move up those rungs. So it's the same thing with this stuff that we're talking about.
Well, let's now that we're saying this and this is coming up, I actually think this might be a good thing for us to kick off the new year with. So like we said, next week we're talking about the oracle cards and tarot cards and how we can use those for self-development. But maybe January we can kick off with going through like chakra exploration, just so that you all have more understanding about how each is important to your development and growth. So are you down for that?
Mm-hmm.
You should
Yeah,
be.
I was actually, I am, because I was actually the other day mapping out in my brain. Like I said, things are inside here. I haven't gotten them out. So it's part of my craziness right now. But yeah, I was thinking of a full blown year-long thing for Mind Your Chakras, based on developing all the
Of the
education
chakras.
around chakras.
So
Mm-hmm.
then maybe this will be like a nice intro to that,
Yeah.
and then people can go deeper with
Yeah.
you in the mind, your chakras. So
Yeah. Now we're holding me very accountable,
yeah,
which I
which
need.
I love to do. So
I
yeah,
know.
but with your guides, like I was saying, you don't have to communicate with everything, and sometimes, um, if you ask to work specifically with your guides, another thing is like asking that you're speaking or communicating with energies that are of the highest vibration. Like you can set that intention, and then you start to get familiar with those energies. You start to get familiar with the frequencies. You get to familiar with what they may feel like, how they communicate to you, all of these things. So then, if you notice or sense or start to perceive other energies that are not necessarily your guides or, your team or your council, however you like to look at it, you are aware of that. So I just wanted to ask you, Tiffany, have you ever noticed or ever had energies come in or feel or sense anything and you're like, who are you? What is this? This doesn't
I'll
feel
tell
familiar.
you when they get me is when I'm sleeping.
Mm.
And we have talked about this at one point, but episodes of sleep paralysis and feeling entities or something that I don't know exactly what they're trying to do, but it's kind of terrifying. And I didn't outrightly communicate with them, but clearly something in my field was allowing this to enter into my space. And then there was another time I was just meditating, and it felt like something was breathing on me, and it was
Mm.
intense. It was super intense. I think I told you about it one time, Yolanda. And I was a little scared at first, but then I was like, just hang with this. And I didn't really like prod it into what was happening. I was just trying to exist in the experience and be open to whatever it was. Not that I wanted to like fully let it in, but I was just like, we're going to coexist right here and just see what's happening.
Yeah.
So it was more of like an allowance of having the experience versus trying to like meld with the experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. It's interesting you say about the sleep paralysis. I actually have those experiences as well. They started when I was 15 and were super intense. And that's actually something I think we should do as a whole nother podcast,
Yeah,
because
we
in my
should.
experiences of it, it felt like I was attempting to astral project or astral travel. So yeah, we'll have to do a whole episode about that, because I know that there are other people who have had those experiences, and that's a meaty topic too. Bryn said
Yeah,
on her
sure.
lunch with Z, she'll watch the replay later. Bye, Bryn. It was good seeing you this
Bye,
morning.
Bryn. Thanks for stopping in.
But I would say with working with guides or sensing or being able to perceive energies that are not in form, the way I tend to know, I'm more, it's more of a feeling for me initially. So I have this familiar feeling of guides that um, I work with, or that, are familiar with me. Like I know them, you know what I mean? It's more of a feeling even before the messages start to come through. But I also have a clear and distinct feeling when it's something that is not necessarily I want in my space. And I mean, it really is just as simple as, again, because I want to talk about this because a lot of people have fear around, what they may see, feel, or perceive. And the truth is, again, like there is so much in our field at all times, like within this realm that we live in, but we just aren't necessarily tuned into it or perceiving it. And so when
Mhm.
you start to open up more intuitively and you do start to perceive things, it's also important to have that confidence of ownership of your own field, in knowing that you can dictate what comes in your space or not. So, you can tell things again, like, no, I don't want to talk to you, leave my space, whatever, whatever. But don't do it from a space of fear. Do it from a space of like authority and confidence, and
Yeah.
also in love.
Yeah. Ownership of knowing your space and trusting that you can manage your space
Mm-hmm.
and that we are the frequency of love. So that can be pushed out. But if you lower that frequency to that same fear level, then we lose the authority in the management of self.
Yeah. And I think that is like such an important thing for people to know. But one of the things we did touch on last time too, and it's something that people ask about all the time, because a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people do want to know their guides specifically. And again, a lot of people get caught up in names and all of these things. So there's two sides to this, and I want to know what your experience has been. Some people will intentionally ask to connect with their guides. And once they make a connection, sometimes they doubt it because, again, maybe the name isn't clear, or, all of these things. But like we spoke about last time, I mean, if you can sense them and the messages are coming through, sometimes they don't give names right away because we may be distracted by what the name may be. And
Mm-hmm.
to that point, I remember one time I had this, I think she was a Reiki student. And you know how in my Reiki classes, we do a journey to meet your Reiki guides. And so we did that. And the guide that came through for her, the energy was like Buddha, or someone that is very commonly known. And so she had a hard time believing that that particular energy would come through for her. Like why me? And again, I mean, if you think of it in terms of some of these uh, enlightened beings or teachers, if their whole, even the stories we hear about them, if they were um, dedicated to teaching and uplifting and helping people come into self-realization in life, why wouldn't you think that they would do that out of body too? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't, like, there's not necessarily this discrimination of like, yeah, no, not that human. Like, no. Anyone that is of an enlightened frequency, I would say. They see us in our true state, our true nature, as love, as of source. And so they're not looking at us in the same judgment or lens that we may judge ourselves. So that's also
Mm-hmm.
something to keep in mind.
That was just making me think, and this might be a little bit out there, but I'm going to throw it out there. As you were saying that, I mean, we talk about source, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
are of source, and all of these beings that are not informed are of source as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think by labeling them, we kind of put them in like, we compartmentalize them and say, like, oh, they're all these different beings that are also of source, but they are the source. So perhaps maybe like what we see as our guides and how we label them or how we see them or how we feel them, however we're interpreting it, is simply just a manifestation of what we personally can understand.
Yeah.
So perhaps that student can only understand Buddha energy, and that's what she needs as her guide.
Well,
So we might judge it because we're saying, oh, that's all I know. I want something so spectacularly different so that I can trust that it's something that's going to guide me versus something that may seem ordinary based on what our physical experience is.
no, totally. You remind me of two things with that. One, in my intuitive mastery class, I think I mentioned this last time, but one time, I think it was the module where people meet their spirit guides, and there was information that came through where, you know, the guides were saying we're essentially just a higher aspect of your own consciousness because we are all of the same source, and we're just vibrating at different levels of the same thing, the same energy. So they were like, in a way, instead of looking at us as like so above you or separate from you, just recognize we're just a higher aspect of your own consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing too, of what you said reminds me of how imagination comes into play. And a lot of
Yeah.
people don't trust because they worry like, oh my God, am I making this up? Is this my imagination? But the truth is, our ability to imagine is just another aspect of our consciousness. And it actually can work, it does work in conjunction with our intuitive mind, because in a lot of ways, your intuition is like learning a new language. And a lot of times we don't have the exact language to describe exactly what it is that we're perceiving or sensing or feeling. But because we have this dual nature of like the analytical mind and intuitive mind, we try to find this middle ground of translation between these two different states of consciousness and these two types of languages, so to speak. And so our imagination can support us in translating what is coming through intuitively. So exactly to what you said, like if I think of a higher being or teacher in a particular way, whether it's from what I've been taught or what I know in this reality of my life, then my imagination will support me and giving me the projection of that thing or person so that I understand what is coming through intuitively in terms of like the level of consciousness I'm interacting with, whether that would be like Buddha or, you know, I don't know, anybody, whoever you want to say. So yeah, your imagination in a lot of ways can support you in helping you to translate what it is that is coming through.
I think that's an important topic also, the just specifically the word imagination, because we
Mhm.
can get caught up in that and try to disprove things with that. And we could disprove anything that we want, but if we go about disproving everything that we're working towards trying to understand, it doesn't benefit us at all.
No.
And so I think unpacking the idea of imagination, how that interplays with intuition is really important.
Well, I think the thing you just hit the head on the nail, as you said, the
Did I
language.
hit the head
You
on the
always
nail?
do. You hit the nail
Oh,
on the
you
head.
said,
I know,
yeah.
honey. Again,
The
trying to
coffee's
get
not
up,
fully
honey.
there
It
yet.
is not. But the thing is we do.
I'm surprised I caught it because I was like, were the puzzle pieces linking together on
I
that
know,
one?
I know. But it really is that thing. It does speak to, again, like us trying to find harmonization or the middle ground between the intuitive and the analytical mind. Is that a lot of times we
Yeah.
get so caught in language. Like our language is so limiting in a lot of ways. And again, we don't have language for, or really for a lot of this. And if you start having these experiences, whether through like meditation, working with energy, all of these things that are in the realm of the non-physical, um, and you try to describe to somebody what your experience is, think of how much you are trying to find words, analogies, metaphors, just to put into language what it is you experience. And there's this part of you that knows this isn't really giving the exact picture of it. You know, because there is this part of us and there is no language for it. But because we have been, again, to your point, like so conditioned to only not just quantify, but validate things that are we are able to articulate or that are in tangible form or that are able to be proven in some tangible way, it's hard for us to move into the space of possibility of like, okay, so how do I trust in something that I can't prove tangibly? And how do I trust and believe in something that I can't give language to? But that's the beauty of learning how to explore this other aspect of yourself, your energetic self, your higher consciousness. It is, in a way, again, like learning a new language that doesn't necessarily, the language isn't in words. It's a totally different get down. And the only way to like really kind of bypass and let yourself get it is having that openness to say like, okay, I'm just going to experience. And then again, find that middle ground between the analyzer and the intuitive and how, where do they meet? And that is even symbolic of what we are. We are spirit and matter. Like here we are, spirit and form. So it's like these two aspects coming together into like this magical thing.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of too, like alchemy, you know, or even like what it took to create us. Like here you have the feminine and masculine principle come together and create something new, a child. Okay. So you have this intuitive and analytical mind and they come together, and then what is produced or accessed is like this higher level of intelligence or understanding. So are we even talking about spirit guides anymore? I don't even know. But anyway,
I
I
don't
hope
even know,
that
but
helps.
I think we're setting a foundation for understanding how we can be more open to spirit guides. I think that's where we've landed, and I think that's a good place to be. Um, because as you were talking about that, I was thinking about how important it is to surrendering our expectations. Um, because if we're closed off to only seeing the information that we see in front of us, and sometimes we need our imagination to kind of like open up the wall to let new information in. And we can't learn without that, without this idea of saying, okay, um, here's what I know, and this is what I know to be true. And my expectations are surrounded only by this information that I hold here. If you're not open to like letting go of those expectations, then you can't open the door to let new information come in. And that's how we grow and learn.
No, it's
What are you
really true.
smirking
I was
about?
smirking because you always have your ink pen, like you look so like, honey, I was just imagining us like on like some kind of like gathering with
Should I
our
go get my
whiteboard.
glasses?
Yes, honey, like we have a whiteboard in the background talking to people, drawing diagrams, you and that daggone ink pen every time. So funny. But
I'm
no,
here taking notes. I can't forget things.
yeah, and you know what is so funny? I know I always taking notes too. What's so funny is I'm surprised we didn't touch on this last time. I don't even know if we did a podcast about it, but it's likely that we did. But it's making me think of connection to the higher self. So aside from like the concept of guides, and a lot of times we want to connect to guides for guidance, but you also have this aspect of like, again, your own higher knowing, this higher aspect of your own consciousness, which a lot of people identify as the higher self or the true self, or what, I don't know, there's so many different names that people give it, but that's also a good place to start. So again, like if you are just kind of like, well, what is the point of a guide or like this guidance or this higher knowing or whatever it may be, starting to recognize and become more aware of your own higher self is like also a good place to start. And it's also something that, you know, takes really relationship building. Mother. So what about you and your higher self? Is that something that you work with? Is it something that you intentionally connect to or like, do any work around?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that I would have made it this far without doing that
Yeah.
for a multitude of reasons. But one of which is just, I mean, existing in our physical earthly world, like you come across people with all the injustice that's around us. I think this is probably a good direction for me to head in. I,
Is it?
I kind of,
I'm just
it's
kidding.
going to have to be because we're going.
Go it.
So
I'm buckled
strap
in.
on your seatbelt. Which one is it? Is it my Libra ascendant? So needing for everything to
Yeah.
be just, like with this deep seated need for things to be fair and just, and you're walking around this world that is completely not. I have to tap into my higher self to like really be able, that's where I have to go to really be able to have compassion and to be able to see people for what else they are other than just being shrouded with the human experience, because otherwise I'll just get mad or sad or like highly irritated, and um, I utilize my higher self most often in those kinds of circumstances to have grace for people and to try to do the right thing in situations that we don't want to do the right thing in, because
Yeah.
as much as I tap into my higher self, I'm also a human too. And those human desires to react or to behave are very prominent. And it's the higher self that can kind of help tame those.
Well, what you're talking about too speaks exactly to that same thing, like our higher mind and our lower mind, or our higher aspects of consciousness, and then this lower, dense ego personality self that is, bumbling through all of these experiences. So, like, basically, like exactly what Tiffany's talking about. Like, we are very familiar with our personality selves, like the things that trigger us, our emotions, our this, our that, everything that comes with being in this physical form. But then there is this higher aspect of our consciousness. It's coming back to me now. We did talk about the higher self because we talked about that
Yeah.
when we are
Well,
in
we did a versus.
recognition.
We did an
Yes,
ego versus higher self, but I think
yes.
tapping into our higher self
But
is another
tapping
good
into
one.
our higher self. Yeah. So it's I forgot what you just said, but it was triggering something in thought. But anyway, what I'll say about it is, like the more we come into recognition of that higher aspect of our own consciousness, we're also able to then, this is what it was, more clearly see that aspect of other people's higher, not their higher, that sameness, so it's like it's
Mm-hmm.
not our ego. And it's funny, the book that I'm reading, I told you, Paul Selig, I love his work. I'm reading his Book of Freedom right now, and there is a portion in there where he talks about, he doesn't refer to it as a higher self. I think he refers to it as the Christed self. But either way, basically the point is, when we look at another person and we're trying to recognize that, or when we allow ourselves to recognize that divine aspect in them that's in us, that's in all things, it's our higher self that actually makes that recognition. It's not our lower ego, because our ego is going to be like, but they did this and that, oh, they're bad, but the
Mm-hmm.
higher aspect of ourselves knows that there is this essence within all of us that supersedes all of like our personality selves. I don't even know where we're going with this, but okay. Okay. Anyway, whatever
I
you
know
said
we
just
went pretty far
reminded
off
me
the
of that.
track.
But the good thing is, the more you do come into relationship with that higher aspect of your consciousness by acknowledging it, by starting to tune into it and trust it and all of these things, it does make our self work much more easy. It does make our self healing easier. It does make all of these tools of transformation and all of these things, it takes them up to a higher level, because then there is more of this allowing and understanding versus our lower self that's trying so hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think to circle it back to spirit guides, it's the lower self that is, I know, I know. I was just trying to find where that little like plug-in was.
Thanks, babe.
Um, I just lost it now though. Hold
You
on,
said
give me a
spirit
second.
guides. You said when we try to connect with spirit guides.
Yeah, so it's the lower self that would be throwing in like, oh, it's just your imagination, like don't pay attention to this. And the lower self will be like, don't find that higher consciousness because I want you to exist just in this lower self of being human, which is great, but there's other great things by way of elevating our thoughts.
Yeah, and I think it's a form of protection too. I mean, I think our
Yes,
smaller self, our
100%.
personality self, our ego, whatever it is kind of like, what you talking about? We're not messing around with things that we don't know. We're not going into the
Yeah.
unknown because is it
Yeah.
safe? And then it starts to deconstruct everything you thought you knew. So it
Yeah.
rattles us in a way and it sends us
Yeah.
into that, it really, listen, for some people, it can be very hard because they are so attached to what they think they know with certainty. And when you start
Hmm.
becoming aware of these different aspects of you, that blows it all up. It's like you really don't know
Right.
anything. We don't know anything. And but if you are open to that, like, ooh, maybe I really don't know anything and let me just go on this journey of exploration, then it's not as hard. But I think, there is definitely a very clear tug of war with the ego that becomes very defiant when you start, having these considerations. But on the other side, too, our egos could also get very wrapped up in um, being special when you start having this awareness too. So say for example, if you like all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I can tune into my spirit guides and I can talk to blah blah blah. I'm sure you've seen this out in the world. In
Yeah.
some ways that can also pump up a lot of people's ego, and that is
Yes.
not at all. So you can, I say that to say you can function from your intuitive mind wrapped up in ego, or you can access the intuitive mind and allow yourself to function from a higher state of awareness. So you still have this choice in how you actually navigate and use this intuitive component of yourself. It's not devoid of the ego unless you work on it. And
I have two things. One was I don't know if I was listening to something or if I read it, but it said, and I wrote it on my notes in my kitchen, like a whiteboard, just because I was like, oh, that's good. I got to remember that. But it would said, the small self rules a small kingdom, and it
oh,
was so
that
simple.
Paul Selig says that.
Oh, was it? Okay, then I must have. I was probably listening to one of his recordings. That's what it was,
You
and I
guys
was
read
like,
his books. They're so
I don't
good.
want to rule a small kingdom. Fuck that. I ain't got time for that. Oh, it's Facebook Live. Sorry. Um, but the other thing, what you were saying is, which I really like because I see this all the time. I'm deeply embedded in the yoga community and the philosophies versus what the capitalistic industry has created of yoga has bred just what you were talking about, these egos of people being like, oh, I can connect to my spirit guides, and I see it all the time in specifically yoga, just because that's where I exist often. um, it's just these people all the time that are, their egos are so blown up about these experiences they've had that are so special, as you said, and like they've separated themselves from other people, and then they've put themselves on these pedestals or on these soapboxes and have created dissonance between other people who are still learning or haven't taken the time to step into it. And it's really interesting to see that small self disguised as the higher self.
Yeah, and that's one of the things of like why we have to be, it's so important to be observers of ourselves because we constantly have to check ourselves. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's
it's easy
we're
to
the
get off
only,
the rails.
yeah, and we're the only ones that could truly check ourselves. But what you're
Hmm.
saying too, it reminds me of like when you're working in that intuitive space from a space of ego, you're also more susceptible to working with lower frequencies and lower energies. And
Hmm.
those can also disguise themselves as higher energies. And it's easy to pull it over like the wool over someone's eyes when they're so wrapped up in ego that they're not really investigating what it is that they are in connection with or to, or what the messages are, versus when you are really making an effort to commune with like your higher self or like this higher energy, higher consciousness. There is this absolute neutrality with it. Like there is no like, yes, like it's not like I'm so great. I mean, it's neutral as hell. Like it's just very like,
Yeah.
this is this, black and white. And the messages are they're never
Exciting.
no, I say they're not excited. They're not like pumping you up. They're not feeding your
Yeah.
ego. And they're
Yeah.
also not damning anything or anyone, I guess is the best way. It's really neutral. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just matter
It
of
really,
fact and supportive.
exactly. And I think that's a huge thing to point out because anytime I've ever done like an intuitive reading with like I've had them done for me multiple times, and they were always like information that was spot on from a stranger. So I can't deny that. But people would always ask me about it. I'd be like, it's already things that I knew. And it was always like, there was nothing ever that like completely derailed me or got me overexcited. It was just like, yeah, okay. And it's neutral. And it's the same thing when I receive messages. And this is kind of where the imagination comes in, or the small self that wants to disprove things, because at least for me, when I get messages, I'm like, yeah, okay. We knew that. Like, thank you for the message. It's never anything that's so like astoundingly different that I'm just like, holy shit, where did that come from? So sometimes I'm just like, is that just something that subconsciously I already knew? But again, we've talked about the spirit is part of our subconscious and so on and so forth. But then I need to bring it back to the ego, and specifically what you're saying about how like it becomes very like showy, and you can be controlled when the small self is in control. Like, it's easier. I can't remember what the exact words are, but I started smirking a lot because it made me think of a very distinct situation that the United States of America is in.
Oh.
Because when you're shrouded in ego, it's very easy to be puppeteered.
Mm-hmm.
So like even
Yeah.
people that are presenting as powerful and all full of themselves, they lose sight of how easily they're actually being influenced by something else.
Yeah.
So plugging that into the spirit guides that we're talking about, that's just something to take into consideration, what that means in your own personal life.
And that's like one way too, you can like check yourself in a way, like if you are starting to open up more intuitively and you do start to connect with your guides or whatever, your higher self, higher states of consciousness, and you're getting messages, if you notice, like if there's any part of you where you feel like you're putting yourself on a pedestal, like as if this is like, like really check yourself and sit with like, how is my ego getting entangled in this experience that I'm having? Because I mean, the truth is, we're all designed this way. Like we all have the ability to perceive and access other states of consciousness, other states of awareness, other realms. Like we're literally designed for this. And whether like how good we may be at it and these types of things, I mean, different reasons why. Some people have traumatic experiences that trigger them into accessing other states, like near-death experiences is a very common one for people. But then there's also, some people just study and practice to be able to access their higher consciousness in these things. But the point is that it's not reserved to like special people. Like do the
Hmm.
work. Anybody could do it if they want to do the work and they want to do this. But again, sometimes it happens for people unexpectedly. But even in those cases, it's still important to do the self work in order to navigate what you are now accessing and, aware of.
Mm-hmm. This is a
I
lot.
know. I know. That's the thing that's so funny about
I
this
feel
is
like I
like,
all of a sudden I just got tapped out. I was like, where did we go?
I
Where did we
know,
go
I
back
know. So bringing it back and just as a roundup or wrap up, I guess, because it is
Yeah.
time to wrap it up anyway. The point is today with your spirit
Yeah.
guides, there's a lot of self work that is involved with accessing the intuitive mind, the higher consciousness guides, whatever it may be. Always start with your self work, period. Start with self connection, start with the practice of self awareness, self observation, and work your way up into having deeper understanding and awareness of these other planes and frequencies and blah, blah, blah. You'll be thankful that you did because, again, it'll help you to have better navigation, clearer awareness, and less risk of getting caught up in the BS around it all.
Yeah. And I think that's a really great point, because people, I think, oftentimes want to skip that step of
Mhm.
connecting with their own self, because a lot of people, and we've discussed this before, don't want to look at their stuff because
Mhm.
it's scary, or they have to face the truth about something and do the hard work. And really, it's not worth skipping that step. It's what you're going to get by trying to tap into these higher things without having done the self work. It's not worth it. It won't be beneficial. So, as scary as it is to look at the self and to look at our own stuff and to work with it, and hard, it is hard, but it's infinitely worth it.
Yeah, and I will
And
say
we're here to help you.
I was going to say, yeah, we're not going to leave you hanging. Like we said, we will go through the highlights of the chakras early next year. So stick around. Next week, we are talking about Oracle and Tarot and how those can also be tools for seeing yourself and self observation.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I also want to point out in all of this, like the intuitive work and these types of things, can also be very humbling. Like I think in a lot of ways it sounds so like interesting and fun and even kind of like, ooh, I don't know. But doing this work in general, intuitive or not, just energy work and all of these things, it can also be extremely humbling. And especially when you are confronted with this awareness of your higher consciousness and your ego and making the choice of which one to let lead. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, we talked about the ego versus the higher self. You can go to the archives if you want to go deeper into this. But yeah. So now what? We have we'll have bonus content, special bonus content for
Mm-hmm.
our Patreons. You guys will be able to access guided meditation and some information about how to connect with your own spirit guides in a very clear way. And then, yeah, we'll see you guys next week to talk about tarot and oracle.
Yeah. And we wanted to put an APB out about that. What was it?
Uh,
I should have written it down. Damn it. Did I? It was
oh,
something about we're requesting something from everybody
yes.
about
Yeah,
our
yeah.
topic on oracle cards.
Yeah. So one of the things we were going to suggest is that not for next week, but the following week where we would normally have our live community discussion as we're doing right now, we're actually going to have to pre-record that as well
Yeah.
because of the holiday.
Holiday.
We'll both be traveling. So we are requesting that if you have any questions about tarot and oracle, please post those questions right away, like today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that we can make sure to cover those. And if you have any decks that you love, that you recommend, please share them on our Facebook page. If you have any tips or techniques for reading or why you personally like to work with decks or cards, let us know. So start the sharing around this topic before we even get into it so that Tiffany and I can make sure to cover whatever you guys bring up, since our community thing will be pre-recorded.
Otherwise, it'll just be us talking about nonsense because we don't know what it is you want.
Yes. And you see, we'll get derailed as we did today.
Yeah.
Although,
Yeah.
hopefully, this is beneficial to you. Like, as always, our intention is always that we provide information that supports you, no matter where you are on your path, no matter where you are in your practice, and that we can all come together and talk about it.
Amen.
All righty. Is
All
that
right.
it?
That's it.
Okay.
That's a wrap.
Goodbye, everyone.